Hello everyone, this is Leah from Manuscript Manager and welcome to our Add Your Team tutorial. If you're the first person from your journal to register with Manuscript Manager, it will be your responsibility to add other team members. This video will show you how to do that. I would ask you to go to the sign in page and sign in. And then you're presented with two roles you can play in the system today, author or administrator. This administrator is the administrator for the editorial office, and that is the role that you would choose if you would like to configure your staff. By double-clicking on that button, you're brought into the dashboard for the editorial office. This dashboard will become more relevant as your journal takes shape and gets active, but for today I'd like you to use the shortcut at the top of the page called Configure. And then on the Configure page, where you can configure all sorts of settings for your journal, I'd like you to choose the Staff button. On the Staff tab page, you see that your name will be listed at the top as the Principal Administrator. This is the role you're given by default when you are the first person to register for your journal. If the radio button is not clicked yet and saved, you can do that. And if you scroll down the page, you see that other roles for the journal are listed by section. We have Associate Editor, Administrators, Editors-in-Chief, and Viewers. Now some of these roles may have different names for your journal and you may not use all of them, but for the basic instruction today I'm going to show you how to add 2 Associate Editors and 1 Editor-in-Chief. Let's go ahead and click Add Editor-in-Chief. Okay, and you'll see that by clicking that button, a very simple form pops up where you can then choose the title for your editor. I'll say Professor. The first name, the middle name, just do an initial, the last name, the email, and we'll choose the dash. And we'll save that basic information. Now you can see we get a little message that Sabi Chowdhury is added to the database. Now what I'd like to do is to search on her name and go into her profile and check and make sure that the permissions are as they should be. So I'm going up to the top again to the shortcut to the search function. And I'm going to search according to person. And I'm going to search according to last name and click search. Perfect. So everything I input before has been registered by the system. I'm going to click Edit Profile to come into her profile, and I'm going to go to Permissions and just double check that Editor-in-Chief permissions have been granted, and they have. As a note, the author permissions are also included as basic permissions for almost every user of the system. So don't worry about that. Scroll a little further down. Editors-in-Chief are also automatically given ordinary reviewer permissions. And further down, there's one more section that's very important, this Decision or Recommendation Permissions section. This is where you really have to take a look at the recommendations versus the decisions permissions and decide how to configure this so that it suits the profile of this editor-in-chief. For my journal, all of the decisions permissions are relevant for the editor-in-chief, so I'm going to click all of these radio buttons. You'll see the page hops a little bit. That's because there are corresponding sections below that pop up. And then we would go down to the bottom and click Update. And we have set the permissions now. We see that Editor-in-Chief is still there, all the permissions that were there before, in addition to the decision permissions that I've just said, have all been recorded. And now we are technically ready to invite this person with an automatically generated email. We would click the password section and click right here when we were ready to invite this team member. It could be that you want to wait a day or two before you do this, or it could be that you'd like to do it right now. I'll show you what it looks like when you click this. And you see that you get a little message saying that the password email has been sent, which means that this team member would be able to log in and join the team. Going back to the configure section and back to the staff section, when we scroll down, we should see that that editor-in-chief is listed, and indeed they are. Great, so that's done, and now I'd like to show you how to add an associate editor. We would do that by simply clicking this button right here, and we're brought to a similar page. I'm going to add Hans van Buren. And when you've got all the information input as it should be, you would click Save. And you see that Hans van Buren has been added to the database. To double check that everything is as it should be, you would go to Search. And it's the same steps as before. Click Person. Search on the last name. Search for the person. Here he is. Perfect. Edit Profile. And Permissions. There we can see that Hans van Buren has been granted Associate Editor permissions. That was very important. That's great that that's checked off. He's also been granted author permissions. As I explained before, those are sort of the basic permissions that are granted to every user. Further down, the Associate Editor is always granted ordinary reviewer permissions. That's just fine. And further down, we have the decision or recommendation permissions section again, and this is where you would have to think about your workflow and what sorts of recommendations or decisions you would like your associate editor to have access to. Here, the settings as they are suit the purposes of my journal, so I have no further adjustments to make, and I would just scroll to the bottom of the page and click Update. And if I were ready to invite, I would go to Password and click Send Password to Hans van Buren. Now that team member has received the email, and I can move on to configuring my last staff member of the day, which is Associate Editor number 2. And when you've got all of that information typed as it should be, you would click Save. And you see that Techie Murad is added to the database. We would, again, search on person, on last name, edit profile. All of that is as it should be. Go to Permissions and make sure that he had been granted Associate Editor permissions. Perfect. Author is also checked off as I explained before. Ordinary reviewer permissions is also checked off as I explained before. And again, for our purposes in our journal, decision or recommendation permissions is fine with the default settings, where the Associate Editor has permission to make recommendations but not decisions. And if everything is as it should be, I could scroll to the bottom and click Update. And the last step would be to invite this team member by sending the automatic password email. And now if I go back to the Configure Staff section, we see that we have 2 associate editors, 1 administrator, and 1 editor-in-chief registered for this journal, and that is sort of the bare bones of staff necessary to get going. So I hope this was helpful. You can always add more staff members as necessary. It's the same exact procedure each time, and if you have any questions, just contact support. Thank you for being with us today. I hope this was helpful, and good luck setting up your journal.